Hi everyone. Thank you for joining in today. This is Varun Srivastava here. I'm based out of UAE and currently lead the threat intelligence function for a conglomerate here. In today's session, which is titled Coronavirus, a reality check for your business continuity plan, we will discuss an extraordinary crisis that has engulfed not only a particular region nor a few countries, but the entire world. This catastrophic onslaught of man-made disaster in the form of COVID-19, or informally called coronavirus, has crippled the businesses and humanity on its knees to an unprecedented effect. In this session, we will understand the impact of coronavirus pandemic from the business perspective and explore how we could keep the lights on to manage the impact of current pandemic, as well as future preparedness to this effect. Extraordinary events require extraordinary measures, and thus, this crisis, being one of its kind humanity has ever seen in its history, the measures to be taken for containing its effect also needs to be very stringent, bulletproof, and in certain cases, far-fetching controls as well. We will try to cover the agenda items in next 20 to 25 minutes, and at the end of my brief, I would be more than glad to answer any questions you might have in this regard. We move forward. The coronavirus outbreak is first and foremost a human tragedy affecting hundreds of thousands of people. It is also having a growing impact on the global economy. The pandemic continues to expand. More than 175 countries and territories have reported cases of COVID-19. The disease caused by coronavirus, which is formerly called SARS-CoV-2. So the case growth has accelerated to more than 1,030,570 cases as of today, and more than 54,000 deaths. Some geographies have handful of cases, and others with early community transmission have a few hundred, and those with uncontrolled, widespread transmission have tens of thousands of cases. Governments have launched unprecedented public health and economic responses. The situation evolves by the day, and it's not showing any signs of weakening. In this webinar, we will discuss key insights as to keeping the business continuity intact in this difficult crisis, starting with a high-level framework which could help business survive the massive onslaught of this crisis, especially in the wake of a lot of countries declaring they are hitting recession. Some of the discussion topics in this webinar will largely determine the business contours of the pandemic in the next year. We also will be discussing the leadership strategy designed to help senior executives lead through the crisis. Then we'll cover the areas such as situational monitoring to determine the change in severity, financial and treasury implications, pandemic communication program, and so on and so forth. Every country is looking to join the few that have controlled the epidemic for now and are focusing on preventing a resurgence. The next stages in every country are unknowable, but I believe the spread of control of this virus in the next year comes down to these major 5 factors. First being growth of new transmission complexes and evidence of seasonality. So while most countries in the world have at least one case, most counts are relatively low. The extent to which these countries follow the path of countries such as Singapore that have achieved rapid control versus that of Western Europe and the United States will be a major driver of outcomes. Moreover, these geographies also skew to more tropical climates and will provide some evidence on how much of mitigating effect heat and humidity will have on the coronavirus. If the virus proves to be seasonal, this has the potential to shape both emerging and existing transmission complexes. Impact of physical distancing measures. We know that rigorous at-scale physical distancing measures can drive a significant reduction in the number of new COVID-19 cases. However, given the range of approaches in use and the varying stringency with which they are being applied, there is much still to learn about what exactly works and how long it takes. Efficacy of health system surge. As the world has awakened to the potential risk of COVID-19, there has been a massive effort to add capacity to the healthcare system rapidly. This has rightly focused on adding acute care capacity, providing ventilators, and building stocks of other critical medical supplies such as personal protective equipment like masks and other things. If this surge can prevent health systems from being overwhelmed, mortality from COVID-19 will be significantly lower. Readiness of the health system to navigate recurrence. As authorities begin to think about what's needed to navigate a post-peak environment, the public health tools deployed will have a different emphasis from today's focus in Europe and the United States and other countries as well. And lastly, the emergence of herd immunity. Herd immunity occurs when a sufficient portion of the population isn't susceptible to an infectious disease. At that point, transmission does not propagate for lack of available hosts. So it typically occurs through either widespread exposure or immunization. Either way, if a herd immunity happens to affect a larger community, that is a very much win-win scenario for both a community as well as healthcare professionals. Pandemics, in fact, top national risk management frameworks in many countries. For example, pandemic influenza tops the natural hazards matrix of the UK National Risk Register, and emerging infectious diseases are tagged as of considerable concern. Seen as a medical problem, each outbreak of a potential dangerous infection prompts authorities to ask a rational set of questions and dust off the menu of response options that can be implemented as needed in a phased manner. Reality, however, is generally more disruptive as national governments and supranational agencies balance health security, economic, and social imperatives on the back of imperfect and evolving intelligence. It is a governance challenge that may result in a long-term consequence for communities and businesses. On top of this, they also need to accommodate human behavior. Businesses need to focus on keeping the business as usual state, minimizing the impact of the pandemic, and in turn ensuring the critical assets as functional, available, and customers not facing any impact of immobilization in a time of crisis. With this framework, businesses can plan to prepare for identifying and prioritizing their critical assets as they do in a regular business impact analysis scenario. However, assessing the preparedness, especially during the time of extraordinary circumstances, definitely require an out-of-box thinking. Businesses need to identify the relevant classes or groups in which their specific assets align. For example, in the proposed framework, we have 5 categories, as you can see here. So we have critical IT infrastructure, mission critical platinum, business critical, which is gold, important as silver, and so on and so forth. Accordingly, for each asset identified in this framework, businesses should identify and, more importantly, test the RTO and RPO for each of the listed services and ensure, in the wake of a remote support, the services are not impacted. In case if there is any disruption, those factors need to be identified, rectified, and disruption has to be minimized. That's the whole goal of having this pandemic preparedness framework in place. It is not about just doing an assessment and identifying the class of your assets and listing down their RTA and RPO, but to test and really test, what exactly will happen in a real-time crisis scenario and ensure that the RTO and RPO is producing enough business support so that in case such kind of crisis happens, you're able to immediately reach to a level where you're supporting your partners and different facets of business ecosystem. The COVID-19 crisis impacts employees at home and at work. Risk management leaders must act to create a psychologically safe workplace that addresses the emotional to promote a resilient workforce. Leading through the rational and irrational sides of crisis require different practices than normal for sure. Distracted by the health risks and day-to-day needs of their families, employees will struggle to integrate work requirements with those home life concerns. Employees will need to negotiate the shifting demands of work, and employees will be fearful of potential impact to their livelihood. At this point, leaders involved with technology, information, and resilience risk technology should be guiding their employees through the COVID-19 health crisis. And they should be ensuring that they create mechanisms for sharing ideas on how to address family needs, acknowledging employees' fears and stress using online forums. They should be allowing for work flexibility beyond remote working opportunities by accommodating different start times, work hours, and general flexibility on when, where, and how work gets done. They should be eradicating the pressure to be presenting by giving clear guidance on which and when employees should come and stay from the office, and any other large gatherings that they should be part of. These leaders should reduce individual work demands through reprioritization as negotiated with the business partners, creating a slack in the system. Leaders should empower employees to contribute to the most critical needs of the businesses by clearly communicating work priorities and aligning resources with them. And they should address employee concerns about their livelihood by providing transparency around the business conditions and performance. At this point, leader has to really step up and show that they are together in this, and the crisis will not impact the employees on a large scale. They have to take the onus of how to maintain the employee morale despite themselves being in a difficult scenario, and showcase that we are standing in a strong scenario. We are going to be together in this, and we will weather the storm and come out more stronger out of this crisis. Because this is a one-of-a-kind scenario that humanity has ever seen, thus leaders have to showcase a particular kind of facet which they themselves have to explore on their own, and bring in these qualities so that employees do not get demoralized and productivity gets hampered. So situational monitoring is something which all businesses should really keep in mind, and should be continually monitoring through valid sources like World Health Organization, through this particular dashboard that we can see driven by Johns Hopkins University, through European Center of Disease Prevention and Control, and other sources of valid nature. National and local public health organizations should determine the severity of event, and local business leaders should take note of that. They should take what actions they are taking that may impact the business operations. They should determine how to keep the workforce safe in the workplace in case there is some critical work that is needed where employees need to be there in person, and how to keep workforce especially safe in their workplace. That is a very important factor that each and every business leader should keep in mind while doing a proper situational monitoring at all times. This has to be, as I said, a continual process and regular check with the business ecosystem, including partners, third-party vendors, and employees need to be conducted through regular stand-up meetings on collaborative platforms, surveys, engagement games, among others. At any point, situational awareness should not be brought in hindsight, and any updates which are of significant nature should be communicated to everyone part of the ecosystem via proper channels. As the global economy progresses through the late stage business cycle, organizations must prepare to navigate through moments of economic flux, which can be economic, geopolitical, environmental, social, or competitive in nature. During the times of uncertainty, most executives choose to stay on course and simply weather changes in economic cycles. However, failing to act on opportunities and risks presented by the turns or particular economic flux would be a grave mistake. The most successful organizations take risks in the particular flux that is happening right now. For example, those places in enterprise journeys where others slow down, the particular leaders of different eras have taken risks, and they have anticipated the future and developed comprehensive action plans before the economic flux, which were rewarded and sustained advantages over the competitors. Legal and compliance leaders should use scenario planning in their capacity as both strategic advisors to the business and functional leaders. Most do the former, particularly for specific situations. In fact, minority of executives expect general counsel to lead their company scenario planning in crisis, and other majority of executives expect them to flag and prepare for major enterprise risks. However, outputs of corporate planning can't be used as is, primarily because corporate planning fails to consider the implications of legal strategy, risk exposures, and demand and supply of legal services. Cascading corporate level scenarios and conducting scenario plannings for your function can definitely help business leaders to revise revenue forecasts, in fact, offset any kind of lost sales, lost production, unexpected expenses, foreign exchange implications. So these measures should be considered during a time such as pandemic-led crisis, which could help offset any kind of revenue impact of finance and treasury implications during the time of pandemic. So business leaders should communicate with investors about any earnings guidance changes. They should determine and report if there will be accounting any close delays. They should also increase financial backstop and monitor every available cash flow. Monitoring working capital is of utmost importance right now. Business leaders should also review corporate insurance coverage for conditions around deductibles, payouts, etc. Example, business interruption insurance and all. And business leaders should also consider using government-sponsored financial relief or bank loans to cover lost revenue and support cash flow in the case of an utmost uncertainty. So these are, some very critical factors that all business leaders should keep in mind from the point of view of financial and treasury implications in the case of an adverse effect of a pandemic on their business. So pandemic communication program has to be established by the business leaders in collaboration with their risk and other teams, and they should establish a solid pandemic communications program. They should have pre-approved message templates and script. Workforce, customers, supply chain, insurance companies, regulators, and so on and so forth should have all these pre-approved messages, in case of communication from pandemic perspective for the business. They should contact information update on a regular basis. They should be providing these information updates to their partner ecosystem through proper channels on timely basis. Businesses have to assign spokesperson which is appropriate for the situation. This person may not change over the time of this particular pandemic. Businesses should prepare organizations for holding statements. They have to communicate regularly, and as well as businesses also need to make sure that people should not feel out of the loop during a pandemic, that in a particular situation when the view is heightened, they should be part of the entire journey. Businesses should also establish an internal business continuity management as well as pandemic portal with links to related resources. If any employee or any partner in the ecosystem needs to access business resources from a particular BCM point of view, that portal should guide this particular entity to reach out to the relevant resource and take timely action. Businesses should also monitor social media for posts about their organization, and which has to be managed carefully. There has to be continuous monitoring in case, for example, at this particular time, there is a competitive sabotage that is about to happen. So they should keep in mind from that perspective that the social media is monitored and any untoward circumstances not being faced. And lastly, businesses should also leverage emergency and mass notification services, which should be automated. And in case of a disaster strikes, in the case of a pandemic, they are able to take action immediately. So impact on business operations is of really high severity requirement for most of the business leaders in the times of pandemic. They should determine if countries of operations have closed transportation into and out of impacted areas. They should develop alternative procedures if possible to ensure continuity of operations. Business leaders should understand local calendars in the countries of operation, and as per the extended national holidays, for example, and how the local calendar impacts the ability to deliver product services. That all has to be considered as part of impact to business operations. They should identify whether key suppliers, third parties are located within affected areas, confirming inventory levels, identifying backup suppliers, and managing stock levels to support delivery to the most critical customers is of utmost importance from the business perspective. Travel planning, again, from a pandemic point of view, they have to review whether a business trip is necessary and implement teleconferencing capabilities as far as possible. Business leaders should procure a travel risk management service solution to get location-specific intelligence and to automate messaging to staff traveling to or from potentially dangerous locations. They should also pre-position the staff close to the hot zone so that when travel restrictions lift, businesses can move more quickly. They should also understand where operations can continue with reduced staff, and which business operations need to be augmented to operate, and which business operations need to be suspended due to a lack of healthy employees. They should understand contractual and service level performance, as well as impacts and communications which are concerned to key partners. And in the end, establish a plan for handling the backlog of work once the business and the situation is back to the new normal. IT action and considerations from a business leader perspective have to consider these major factors. The IT supply chain for pandemic preparedness, keep an extra IT inventory on site in case of resource failures. They have to implement remote data center management solutions, leverage the cloud to shift the risk out of region. But again, this is not a silver bullet, and depending on the kind of business you operate in, that has to be considered from the risk point of view. Businesses should implement review work from home programs. They should especially issue for bring your own device, and has to be reviewed during this particular heightened crisis time. They should investigate alternative voice and chat communication scenario and implement web-based video conferencing. Businesses should also decide which operations require heavy internet usage and must continue, and which can be delayed. They have to reschedule some IT operations activities, and delivery of training videos during the pandemic activations period also need to be considered for heightened employee awareness. And lastly, they have to realign IT projects and IT budgets for staff as well as third-party availability. Lastly, the after action review has to be considered after everything is let's say on a normal scale, after you have kind of implementing the scenario as well as business continuity management plan in the perspective of pandemic. So you have to identify at least 3 lessons learned or key observations that businesses experienced as a result of the exercise. They have to review at least 3 areas for improvement in the exercise, identify response plan, as well as determine the decision making processes, etc. Businesses should list and prioritize the short-term and long-term follow-up actions. And lastly, develop exercise results report to ensure that this particular pandemic kind of situation, if it happens in a near future, the businesses are ready to face the impact, and any kind of onslaught on the business operations is kind of balanced in making sure that the finance and treasury implications are minimized. At this point, I would like to go ahead and close the discussion here, and invite attendees to ask any questions that you have, and I would be more than happy to answer any concerns or any questions, or if you have general comments in this regard, more than happy to discuss and open the floor for it. Thank you.